Hello, and welcome to a fantastic Friday night. We could not be happier to welcome back one of our favorites. So we want to take this time to thank the Winthrop Public Library Foundation, and we want to thank the Performing Arts Center for letting us come here since it's so huge of an event. And we want to thank our fantastic Bailey Public Library patrons, best readers and book lovers in the state. We love all of them. So, thank you so much. Every summer, we do a community read where we try to get everybody in Winthrop to read the same book. It's a huge deal, and we promote it for several months. And we're just so thrilled that tonight we are welcoming back an author who we had a few years ago. Her new book, A Piece of the World, I think is just a phenomenon. It's a true piece of art. The themes that it talks about an artist's work, and the value of art, human empathy, and the relations that we have with other people, loneliness and solitude and community can resonate with all of us. And so it was a perfect choice for this book. And now we're going to have Richard introduce our author.
So, if you notice when you came in, there are lots of places to park. So I'm contractually obligated to mention we're doing a project. The Winthrop Public Library Foundation sponsored this event. There's a raffle, and if you want some more information, we're hoping to get some parking at the library, so we can have events over there easily. So Christina Baker Kline is the author of 5 novels. Her 2013 novel, Orphan Train, spent more than 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list, including 5 weeks at #1. Has been published in 38 countries. Kline has also written and edited 5 nonfiction books. Her essays, articles, and reviews appear in the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Psychology Today. Kline was born in Cambridge, England. She was raised there, but also she was raised in the American South and Maine. She is a graduate of Yale, Cambridge, and the University of Virginia, where she was a Henry Hoynes Fellow in Fiction Writing. She has taught poetry, literature, and women's studies at Yale, NYU, and Drew University, and served as writer-in-residence at Fordham University. She is a recipient of several Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation fellowships and writer-in-residence fellowships at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She is a member of the advisory board for Roots and Wings, a nonprofit that provides support for at-risk adolescent and age-bound foster care youth. Kline lives in an old house just outside New York City with her husband David, 3 sons Hayden, Will, and Eli, although I think at least one of them spread their wings. So she spends as much time as possible in an even older house in Southwest Harbor, Maine. After the talk, Christina's going to sign books. And in the cafe, adjacent to the lobby where you came in, she's going to make her way down there. Let her get there before you crowd. So tonight, as Shane mentioned, she's discussing our 2017 community selection, A Piece of the World. Please give a very warm welcome to Christina.
Are we going to have the best evening? We are. I am so happy to be here because, and you guys, can you turn the lights down? Because I had such a great time with Orphan Train when I came here. It's really, I have to say, I've been traveling for years with that book, and this town was one of my most fun experiences. Were any of you there? I think yes. Church, I think it was, right? It was in a the library, right? I walked in, and it was super crowded and really fun. I had a great time. So anyway, I'm so glad to be here. I'm completely honored that it's just a community. As I said, that Orphan Train is often community reads a lot, and starting to happen for A Piece of the World too. It's a really exciting thing. What I'd like to do tonight is to take you through the story of why I'm the only person in the world who's written this book. And I'm going to share with you some stuff about my own family and then move into talking about the cultural impact of the painting in America and beyond. And then we'll do a tiny bit of art history, and we'll end with Wyatt and his relationship, real life relationship with Olsen, who's his huge 30 years in Maine. Have any of you been to the family homestead, the Olsen house? Yeah, okay, good. And I would, right, you're not very far from it. So I would imagine that many of you are quite familiar with it. And I hope later, perhaps during the Q&A, I can hear if any of you have personal connections. I'm on an 11-day swing through southern Maine right now and New Hampshire. And the people who come I'm just flabbergasted by how much fun it is and how many people have connections to the Olsens and the Wyatts. And I posted on Facebook yesterday, I guess. I did an event. So it was Wyatt's, the 100th birthday of Andrew Wyatt, who died in 2009, but we're all celebrating. There are stamps and all this wonderful stuff. And I was at the Farnsworth Museum, and Helga, who was later his muse, after Christina Olsen, and a very controversial figure. Helga showed up with a book for me to sign. And I had this crazy, it was like a slightly out-of-body experience because Helga, his real-life muse, was asking me to sign the fictional memoir of his other real-life muse. My brain was hurting, but it was quite an honor and it was exciting. She's a very interesting character. So again, if you could pull this light down just a tiny bit, it's all right, so here is the painting, Christina's World, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. At least you may have seen it in the back of my novel, if not, but here we are in Maine, so I know you know it. This painting is at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, where it has been since 1948. Andrew Wyatt, when he started to paint it, he told his wife Betsy that he thought he wanted to paint a masterpiece. He actually had that ambition for this painting. He said he wanted to paint something that would outlive him, that would be the most brilliant work of his. So, which I find very interesting. A lot of times, my friends and I, who are writers, talk about ambition sometimes feeling gendered, that men might set out to, paint to write a great book, for example, of a certain sort of stature, and he certainly did that. But when he was about halfway through painting it, this was 1948, as I say, he was racked with doubt, and he told Betsy, that his wife, that he thought it might be a complete flat tire, is what he actually said. But as soon as he finished the painting, it was snapped up by the Museum of Modern Art, held onto it ever since. It's only traveled for $1,800, by the way, $1,400 of which he received because he had a dealer who got the rest. And it's interesting because I think the Museum of Modern Art is ambivalent about the painting. It's really like nothing else in their collection, and yet it's the most popular postcard in their gift shop, and it is one of their most popular holdings. It's today considered priceless. It's uninsurable. It's so famous, and it doesn't travel at all, which is kind of a shame because I was talking to a curator who at a national museum who said, it really should. I wish it were at a place like the Fine Arts Museum in Boston, because they would really know how to display it and contextualize it. If you go to see it at the Museum of Modern Art, it's across from an escalator down the hall from a bathroom. But my relationship with the painting began here. I am standing on the snowy front porch in my short-sleeved southern dress. 1970, my parents moved to Maine. I'm the girl with the white pigtail holders. My sister Cynthia's beside me. My parents had southern accents. They were from North Carolina and Georgia. And Cynthia and I had English accents because we'd been born and raised in England. So you might imagine Bangor, Maine, we wasn't quite sure what to do with us. And my parents were young professors. My dad was in the history department. He had taken a job in the history department at the University of Maine. And they were determined to kind of show us Maine. So we went to bird museums, and we went to maritime museums, and we climbed mountains and traveled on lakes and sort of did everything we could to get to know our new adopted state. And we read all the time. Here I am on the ubiquitous shag rug from the 1970s in a familiar pose reading, which we all did. And my father was determined again to sort of introduce us to Maine writers. So we read everything by E.B. White for children. We read Robert McCloskey, and we read Margaret West Brown. Any connection, any tangential connection, we read books by. So in addition to that, my dad was sort of intrepid, in other words, embarrassing as a father, because he just was fearless and perhaps shameless in his adventuring. So, for example, one day he got it in his head that we needed to find E.B. White and thank him. So he sweet-talked a gas station attendant in the general vicinity of where E.B. White lived and got him to give up the goods, tell us where E.B. White lived. And so this rusty station wagon full of little girls pulls up in front of E.B. White's house, And the poor man was innocently clipping his hedges out in front. And we all jumped out, and to his immense credit, he could not have been more gentlemanly and kind to us. We all, started quoting from Stuart Little and, Charlotte's Web. And here he is showing us that when you crush pine needles between your fingers, the smell is as strong as patchouli. And I've never forgotten that. He was just so kind. Another one of our adventures was trespassing in Christina's world. Here we are in front of the house. My dad, again, got it in his head that we were going to take a picnic and picnic down in the grass where Christina was lying. Of course, I now know that this house we were trespassing. It was not open to the public. It was a private property at the time. But here we are on that beautiful day. My grandmother is standing there. I'll talk more about her in a second. I wrote an article for the New York Times about this a couple of months ago, and here is the artist's rendition of our family down there and having our picnic. And while we're at it, I'll show you a couple more illustrations. This is from my New York Times review. There's Christina. And most recently, I wrote a feature for Down East Magazine. Some of you may have seen it. But by the way, if you don't feel you've gotten enough tonight, that article is very long. And I talk a lot about Wyatt's reputation and about my own experience of the novel, the painting. But this is the artist drawing. That is me climbing into the painting. So the little girl with the white bow in her hair is my grandmother. Her name was Christina Curtis. So I'm, as you know, Christina. My mother was Christina. My grandmother was also Christina. I'm the third. So Christina Curtis is the girl with the white bow, and Christina Olson, the woman in the painting, is the other little girl. My grandmother, Christina, and Christina Olson were born within a couple of years of each other in similar circumstances. They were both born in white clapboard farmhouses in the middle of nowhere with cows and goats and pigs and sheep, chickens. They both were early readers, precocious little girls. They both ended up sort of taking care of their families from a young age. So when I began working on this novel, my own grandmother's stories about her rural childhood were part of what inspired my portrait. When I was turning 8, my father took me to the University of Maine craft fair, which I still believe happens these days. And we met the author, the artist who did this woodcut, which she said had been inspired by Christina's world. My father bought it for me for my 8th birthday because he thought it reminded him of me. This is what I looked like at that age. And I still have that picture on the wall of my bedroom today. And this is a painting by the Massachusetts artist Laura Trine Jennings. When my parents bought a house on the coast of Maine, Bass Harbor, this artist knocked on the door one day and said she'd love to paint the rooms. She did end up painting many rooms in that house. And then she also did this portrait of my mother walking through the field to the house, and she called it Christina's World. And you can see, right, the sort of echo of that painting. By the way, if you've read Orphan Train, this house that my parents bought on the coast became the model for Vivian's house. Yeah. They built a wraparound porch and lived in it for many years, and my father is living there this summer. So here is one of those stamps. I'm going to be showing you a few more that were released just 2 days ago. So Laura Trine Jennings chose that angle and chose to call the painting Christina's World because the image resonated for her so much. And indeed, this motif, this painting, has, I believe, become printed on the American psyche. In fact, Christina's World is one of the most widely copied and parodied images of all time in many different art forms, and I'm going to take you through a few of those now. So, beginning with Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, watching her house go off in the distance. By the way, whoever has a great laugh, I want to take you with me everywhere I go. Some man has wonderful laugh. Here's Mary Poppins, and the title of this parody is Christina's World is About to Change. There's Princess Leia, Star Wars. And here is Godzilla. Moving on to cartoons, there's Wile E. Coyote making his way to the Happy Factory. Here's Iron Man in the Marvel comics. Mr. Burns in the Simpsons. Portrait on the wall there. And here is a syndicated cartoon which reads, "This is nice. Just you, me, Buster, and a landscape." The painting has been used in social commentary. Here is Christina making her way through an American-made oil slick. You can see that American flag up there in the distance. Here she is once they paved paradise. Here she is in a barren nuclear landscape, a post-apocalyptic dystopia. And the photographer Carrie Ann Weems has a current exhibit at the Natural Museum in North Carolina in which she portrays herself as Christina, as a slave looking at an antebellum. So the painting has been used in political commentary in the last political cycle alone, up until a couple of days before. Days before today, I just put a new slide in. So we'll start with Chris Christie's world. So this was when, of course, he was running for president. This next slide appeared in the New York Post about 2 days before the national election. Moving on to the resistance. And then some of you may remember a few months ago, there was a tempest in a teapot when Kellyanne Conway sat on the couch. So I was already on book tour at that point. I think it was in California at the time, and I got about 40 Facebook messages, texts, emails from people with this image. I actually contacted the guy who did it, the artist, and I said, "This is really funny, and I'm going to put it in my slideshow. But what was your thinking? Why did you choose this image?" And he said, "I think what I was trying to say is that all of us live in Kellyanne's world now." So this last image was just a couple days ago. My esteemed governor, state of New Jersey. Some of you might have heard about a little kerfuffle when he closed the beaches for the 4th of July, and he himself was caught on the beach with his family. He's looking up at the plane that's taking his photo right here. So there's Chris Christie again. It's been used in fashion. Here's a Vogue photo shoot. Harper's Bazaar. It's been used in movies. Terrence Malick said that Days of Heaven was very much influenced by her figure and by the house and by the landscape. Christina's world. Robert Zemeckis said that this scene in Forrest Gump in the pink dress was an homage to Christina's world. The costume designer for Outlander said that she had been influenced by the painting. And this character in Westworld, when they were creating this character, they had an idea board, and one of the things hanging on that idea board was the painting Christina's world, the landscape and the character. She said, quite influential. And here we have The Walking Dead. So the painting has inspired homegrown art, people's creative process and vision. Here is an artist's mannequin. Here's a modern interpretation. Here we have a sort of folkloric way of presenting it. Believe it or not, there's an entire website devoted to toast of famous artwork. There's a tattoo. There were many tattoos to choose from, and I will tell you that I chose the least ugly one. I love this birdhouse. And no collection of memes would be complete without cats, of course. So here's Christina riding a cat, and An even better one, I think, is this one. Notice the mice as clouds in the sky, olive yarn, and the little mouse in the corner. So Christina is often depicted as vulnerable, and here she is, literally in the path of an oncoming train. There's an indie band called Vampire Weekend. Someone did this mashup of their lyrics with the painting, and it says, "Oh, I was made to live without you, but I'm never going to understand," which, by the way, I think is kind of accurate about something I was trying to capture as well in my novel. And the actress Claire Danes did a ballet off Broadway a number of years ago in which she portrayed Christina Olsen in her pink dress from being able-bodied. It was a ballet, she was dancing, from being able-bodied to becoming disabled, as she did over time. And by the end of the performance, Claire Danes was pulling herself around. At the Museum of Modern Art, I saw this photograph, which, by the way, is enormous. It's bigger than it is even on that screen, by Cindy Sherman, the famous artist photographer. And in this photograph, she imagines what it would look like if Christina Olsen were to turn her head, which I think is an interesting question, and it's also one that I addressed in my novel. What would it look like if she were to turn her head? Because the truth is, we don't know anything about her. She is a mystery. And what is it about the painting that's so enduring and haunting? Is it the figure of the girl? Does it have something to do with the setting? You know, Andrew Wyeth famously said that when he finished Christina's World, he was tempted to paint her out altogether because he felt that he had already captured her essence. And in fact, he was famous for painting objects or stand-ins for people. Here's another stamp. It's his painting, Wind from the Sea, which he did in an upstairs room at Wyeth House. He said that this painting was about Christina and also about himself. Wyeth's biographer, Richard Merriman, said the pattern of crocheted birds, as dainty as the real Christina, fluttered and awoke memories of Wyeth's own sickly childhood, lying in bed watching the window curtains lift and fall. Those ragged lace curtains on their delicate birds are metaphors for the femininity hidden by Christina's misshapen shell. There's an early sketch for this painting in which he has drawn Christina, and over it he superimposed this. And this, by the way, in my slides, I'm going to show you some paintings that are really lovely. Some images of when they reframed the painting fairly recently. Check it out and did it home. So over the years, I came to believe that this painting is a magic trick, a Rorschach test, a sleight of hand. The down-to-earth naturalism of Wyeth's paintings is deceptive, one critic said. In his work, all is not as it seems. His paintings always have an undercurrent of wonder and mystery. He was fascinated with the darker aspects of human experience. And I think you get glimpses of this in those arid, dry as bones grasses, rendered in startlingly precise detail in the foreground, and that lone piece of laundry floating like an apparition in the breeze. In fact, I did a radio interview recently where the interviewer said, "That house just gives me the willies." He said, "That house is painting." He said, "You just don't know what's behind its windows." And it reminds me of the house in the movie Psycho. And I thought that was really interesting because the house in the movie Psycho was inspired in part by Hopper's 1925 painting House by the Railroad, which also influenced Wyeth, and which, by the way, hangs beside Christina's World at the museum. So at first glance, this slim woman in the grass appears languidly relaxed, but a closer look reveals odd dissonance. Her arms are strangely thin. Her legs and feet seem twisted. Perhaps she's older than she appears. Her face is turned from the viewer, but she seems strangely poised. She's alert, yearning toward the house, and yet hesitant. Is she afraid? So after I finished writing my novel Orphan Train, I began to look for another story that would engage my mind and heart as completely. I'd learned a great deal about early to mid 20th century America, and I wanted to linger in that time period. I'd become particularly interested in rural life, how people got by, and what emotional tools they needed to survive hard times. As with Orphan Train, I liked the idea of taking a real historical moment of some significance and blending fiction and nonfiction, filling in the details, illuminating a story that has been unnoticed or obscured. So one day, several months after that novel came out, a writer friend remarked that she'd seen the painting at the Museum of Modern Art. For some reason, she thought of me. And it was so strange. I don't know if it was my name or Maine, but instantly I knew I found the subject. And what's even stranger about it to me is that I don't know if she hadn't said that to me at that moment, if it would have occurred to me, but I knew right away. And so for the last 2 years, I've immersed myself in Christina's work. I sat in front of that actual painting for hours at the Museum of Modern Art, listening to the enthused, perturbed, intrigued, dismissive, passionate comments from passersby all over the globe. My favorite was from a Danish woman who was standing there with her head cocked, and then she turned to her boyfriend after a while and said, "Just so creepy." I studied the work of all 3 famous artist Wyeths, N.C. Wyeth on my far right, Andrew in the middle, and his son Jamie on the left, to get a sense of their rich and complex family. N.C. Wyeth was best known as an illustrator, and if you get a chance to see his paintings, they're quite spectacular. They're enormous, really colorful. His version of Treasure Island is still in print today. And Jamie Wyeth, as you can see in this painting, was quite influenced by his father's work. His own work has gone on to manifest in many different directions, but I think you can see in this one, Twin Houses, the effect of his father on him. And I spent a lot of time at the Wyeth building at the museum that I'm sure is familiar to you all in Farnsworth, the Farnsworth Museum. In this photograph that I took, Christina is up there. That's a sketch for Christina. And of course, at the Olson House, which is down on Hathorn Point, there's the sign leading there. If you go there today, you will in fact not be trespassing. It is part of the Farnsworth Museum. It's open to the public, and of course, there are tour guides who give tours every day. So the summer that I was beginning to think about writing this book, I went and took a tour with a lovely 22-year-old college girl, and she had some really interesting stories. But this woman was lurking in a corner, dark corner, and she pulled me by the arm and said, "Why are you taking notes?" And I was not sure how to answer, but I finally realized I can't really hide it. I said, "I think I'm going to write a novel, or I'm working on an idea." And she said, "Well, I have been giving tours since this house opened to the public, and I know everything." And she slipped me her card and said, "Give me a call." And of course, I did give her a call, and here I am in Sarasota with her. I followed her all over the place. She did diagrams of where the family members slept. She fact-checked everything I did. She was always sending me articles. And one thing I have learned about docents and tour guides is that they have this incredible body of knowledge, and they really want to share it. So I was lucky to become friends with Rainey Davis, and I've been with her for the past 2 days talking about this book. So she's out there running around with me. This is Nancy Jones, the woman in the blue sweater. She's another tour guide who got in touch with me, and she was incredibly helpful as well, partly in introducing me to people. So the woman in red is named Joey Willamette. She's 91 years old, when the photo was taken a couple of years ago. We met her at her nursing home, and she was holding Orphan Train, and she said to me, "I'm 91 years old, and I identify with Vivian." She's lovely, and so she welcomed us in, and she had grown up going to the Olson house summer after summer after summer, and she knew Christina quite well, so she had very interesting stories to share. The woman in red is Jean Olsen Brooks, Christina's niece, her brother Fred's daughter, who wrote a wonderful book that I love that's out of print about Christina, and it had lots of stuff in it. And if you've read my novel, which I'm sure many of you have for this community read, I should tell you that almost everything that happened in the book, as much as possible, I stuck to the facts of the story. The man in the blue shirt in the foreground is David Rockwell, and again, I've been with him for the past couple of days as well. He is Wyatt's nephew, and he gives tours on Thursdays at 4 p.m. at the Olsen House. You get a chance to hear him. He's just wonderful, and I interviewed him, and he also was a consultant for the book. I spent more time than I needed to thinking and writing about the Salem witch trials, which figure prominently in the family history, because this man, John Hathorne, was Christina's ancestor on her mother's side. She was descended from him. He was the notorious chief magistrate of the Salem witch trials and the only one who never recanted. He went to his death in peaceful prosperity, fully believing that he was justified in putting 19 women, 2 dogs, and 1 man to death for witchcraft. He was just a terrible person altogether. He persecuted Quakers. He tricked, lied to, trapped, and murdered Native Americans. And after he died, there were lots of Hathorns living in Salem, and they were tainted by association with him. So in 1741, 3 Hathorn men who answered an ad, Samuel Waldo in Maine was promising 100 acres. If you would go and claim it in the winter, you could take 100 acres. So they fled from Salem, they changed the spelling of their name, and they built 3 log cabins on a remote point in Maine, one of which became the house in the painting Christina's World. Some of you may recognize this man, Nathaniel Hawthorne, another Hathorne, also left Salem, also changed the spelling of his name, and he spent the rest of his life writing about men like his ancestor, who were determined to root out evil in others while denying it in themselves. Young Goodman Brown, Scarlet Letter, he actually was quite obsessed with his own family. On the other side, Christina was descended from 4 Swedish peat farmers. Her father, Johan Olausson, was a boy raised in a house about this size with about 10 children and a cow for warmth. And he quite sensibly jumped on a ship at the age of 15 and never looked back, sailed all over the world, ended up in America on a ship on its way to Thomaston. They got trapped in the ice right outside of Hathorn Point. On that ship, he learned as he was looking up at the house that there was a spinster daughter and that the house was about to, as they called it, daughter out. And so within a few months, he had learned English. He had knocked on the door of that house, become engaged to that older woman. And in fact, the Hathorn house changed his name to John Olsen. It became the Olsen House. So with this combination of traits, Christina was, I believe, uniquely poised to become an iconic American symbol. Alone in a sea of dry grass, she is the archetypal individual against a backdrop of nature, fully present in the moment, and yet a haunting reminder of the immensity of time. As one curator says, this painting is more of a psychological landscape, than a portrait, portrayal of a state of mind rather than a place. This is Wyatt's painting Spring. His style was forged in his father's studio as a child, developing in the 1930s and 40s under the intertwined influence of American regionalism and figurative surrealism. It's described today as a form of metaphoric realism in which the ordinary is heightened to reveal qualities of fundamental human existence. Magic, Wyatt said, it's what makes things sublime. It's the difference between a picture that is profound art and just a painting of an object. I want to show you something really interesting. So Magritte was one of Wyeth's favorite painters. And here is Magritte's painting, The Collective Invention, 1934. Here again is at the other end of the spectrum, Thomas Eakins, the Philadelphia realist painter, was also quite an influence, and many people feel that his 1883 painting, An Arcadian, was a precursor to Christina's work. Here's Whistler's Mother by James Whistler, 1871, and this is Grant Wood's American Gothic, 1930. These three paintings are often mentioned in the same breath, American Gothic, Whistler's Mother, and Christina's World, because I think that they share traits that we tend to think of as distinctly American. And to me, those would be rugged individualism and quiet strength, defiance in the face of obstacles, and a kind of stubborn perseverance. Speaking of which, Christina Olson, who's the little girl in the middle of this picture, standing at the house in the painting. Christina Olson was born in 1893 on Sharon Hill in Cushing, Maine, with three brothers in a house that the family, as I say, had lived in for generations of ship. Christina is on my far right, the schoolmistress is in the middle, and Alvaro, her little brother, is on the far left on the bottom. At the age of 12, the schoolmistress went to Christina's father and said, "This is the most brilliant child I've ever taught. And I would like to retire in a few years and have her take over the school. I'd like to tutor her in Latin and advanced mathematics." And Christina's father said, "Absolutely not. She's needed on the farm." So this brilliant girl spent the rest of her life essentially making 3 meals a day and doing all of the family laundry. And I think of Virginia Woolf and her book, A Rule of One's Own, and her idea, her concept of Shakespeare's sister, that is all the women, all the brilliant women throughout history whose lives have been subsumed by domestic chores and who never got a chance to really explore what they might have been capable of. Because Christina was, by all accounts, brilliant. Here she is as a young woman. She was an active and vibrant presence. She had a lust for life, a fierce intelligence, and a determination not to be pitied, despite the degenerative disease that eventually stole her mobility. So, most of you have probably read the novel already. Here Christina is as a young woman, my far left. Next to her is Walton Hall, the man who broke her. Next to him is Alva Carl, and then Ramona Carl, and Christina's brother Sam. Well, don't they look just like the most incredibly typical example of like the teens and 20s, sort of carefree, romantic idea. Here Christina is a number of years later with her mother. Though she was never correctly diagnosed in her lifetime, many neurologists now believe that she had a syndrome, Charcot-Marie-Tooth, or CMT, a hereditary disorder that damages the nerves to the arms and legs. I attended a lecture at the National Neurology Convention in 2015, at which Dr. Ronald Anderson gave a paper he wrote for the Harvard Medical Review about his posthumous diagnosis of Christina Olson. By the way, her father was also in a wheelchair for the last 15 years of his life, and I believe that he too has CMT. All over the country, I've met people with CMT who come to my events, and neurologists also, and I'm giving a keynote address at the National CMT Convention in New York in October. I learned a lot about the disease. Curators have been unwilling to really go as far as saying that that's what they think Christina has, but I've become completely convinced about it by reading a number of medical articles, by watching. There's a documentary called Bernadette about a young woman with CMT. It influenced me quite strongly as I was writing the book, actually, because they filmed this woman from the age of, from childhood, very early childhood, being an infant, until the present day. She's in her 30s, I believe. And so I could really see how the disease progressed for her over time. And it was helpful as I was creating this character. So Christina's life became smaller and smaller, more attenuated as she became more disabled, and her prospects began to sort of fall away. And it became harder and darker, I would say. But then one day, July 12th, 1939, this 22-year-old young man knocked on her door, Andrew Wyatt. So that very day, Andrew Wyatt turned 22, and it was his birthday. He made a trip to go, he knocked on the door of a local artist. He was already renowned as a painter. His work was already exhibited all of the United States. Of course, his father was a famous painter. And he knocked on the door of this painter. The door opened, and this young girl, 17-year-old Betsy James, answered, wearing a skimpy little halter top, actually, and little shorts, which seemed quite risque to me for 1939. Even more risque, she said, my father's not home, but I'll hop in your car and drive around with you all afternoon. So that's in fact what happened. And they drove around all afternoon, and they ended up at the Olsen house. Betsy later said it was sort of a test to see how he would react to Christina. Well, as they drove up to the house, he was immediately smitten. And if you've read my novel, you know the first scene of the book is exactly what happened. He jumped on the hood of the car and asked for a glass of water, and she went into the house and got it from Christina and came back. He did a watercolor of the house, the first of more than 300 paintings, sketches, watercolors that he did of the house. Andy and Betsy were married 10 months later, and he spent the next 30 years, as I've said, coming to the Olsen house. So here he is as a young man. He was charming, he was incredibly eloquent, he was, they said, movie star handsome. He seemed to have nothing at all in common with Christina Olsen. I mean, he couldn't have been farther from her. His family was very wealthy, they had multiple houses and lots of cars. He sort of lived large. Here he is, another portrait as a young man, but he actually identified with her. As a child, he'd had this terrible hip conditions, and one of his legs was shorter than the other. He walked with a limp. He was in pain, actually, a lot of times, and he had been kept out of school. He later said he felt his father had raised him in the jail of his studio. His father essentially said, this kid shows promise, I'm going to teach him to be a painter, and he does not need to go to school. So he had very few friends. He felt eccentric, like an oddball, he said, like a cripple. He wasn't athletic. He felt misunderstood, an oddity on the fringe. I don't fit in. I pick out models who are misfits, and I'm a misfit. One of the wonderful things about Andrew Wyatt is that he was incredibly eloquent about his experience as a painter and what he felt about what he did. And his biographer, Richard Merriman, got so many incredible quotes out of him. So I just want to give you one example of what he said about that house. The world of New England is in that house, he said. Spidery, like crackling skeletons, rotting in the attic, dry bones. It's like a tombstone to sailors lost at sea, the Olsen ancestor who fell from the yardarm of a square river and was never found. It's the doorway of the sea to me, he said, of mussels and clams and lobsters and whales and sea monsters. There's a haunting feeling there of people coming back to a place. So I want to show you some pictures now of the house, and you'll see, and some of you have probably been there, how you can really feel Wyatt's paintings as you even look at these photographs. So this is the front entrance leading down to the door. Here's a picture right there at the front door of Wyatt sitting with Christina's brother, Alvaro. Here's an upstairs room he painted from, and if you look at that roof line, that is exactly one of Wyatt's paintings, and I'll show you a close-up here. You may recognize that one. I recently did a keynote address at the Brandywine, which is the Wyatt Family Museum in Pennsylvania, and they took me on a tour of his studio, and this is how he painted, with eggs. He painted with egg tempera, And here are the dry pigments and the eggs in his studio. Really fun to see them. Here's another room. He painted all over the Olsen house. Here's another room that was one of his favorites upstairs. So I told you about the Salem witch trials. Well, when one of those convicted witches was standing on the scaffold, she put an eternal curse on the family of John Hathorne. I suppose in the spirit of, if you can't beat them, join them. In other words, if you're going to put me to death for witchcraft, then I'm going to curse your family. And the family sort of took it to heart, and Christina's grandmother, Tryphena, always left this blue door open between the shed and the kitchen for the witches to come. Here's Wyatt's rendering of that. Here's a picture of the shell room, where they had hundreds and hundreds of shells that Christina's ancestors and even her father had collected on their journeys around the world, sailing around the world. Here's a close-up of that. Here's the kitchen. You can see how very rustic it is. There's the hand pump that I described in the novel, and there's another view. This is one of Wyatt's paintings. He painted these buckets. So Alvaro loved the sea. He had a lobster boat. He had this dory that he went out in all the time. And when their father became sort of incapacitated, he went to Alvaro, much as he had done to Christina, and said, "You can no longer go out. You got to take over the farm. It's a full-time job, and got to put your boats away." So Alvaro was bereft, but he stuck his dory in the attic of the shed because he said he couldn't bear to look at it. And sometimes Christina would find him asleep under it. Wyatt knew this story, and he painted. There's a beautiful painting of Alvaro's dory called the Haymow. Here's the kitchen with Christina's beloved geraniums and the Glenwood range. There's a close-up of the Alvaro's rocker. And remember Laura Tryon Jennings, the painter who did a picture of my mother. When I wrote to her asking permission to use her painting in my slideshow, she said absolutely, and she sent back this one as well, which she did of the Olsen kitchen. Here's a view from the outside. Wyatt has a famous painting with Christina visible in this window. So over time, he began incorporating her into his paintings. And for more than 30 years, as I say, he painted her. What interested me about her, he said, is that she would come in at odd places, odd times. The great English painter John Constable used to say that you never have to add life to a scene, for if you sit quietly and wait, life will come. Sort of an accident in the right spot. This happened to me all the time. That it happened all the time with Christina. So they have this amazing relationship. Look, there's Alvaro painter as well. And in addition to the things I've already talked about, they had other things in common. For example, they both embraced austerity but craved beauty. Both were curious about other people and yet almost pathologically private. They were perversely independent and yet reliant on others to take care of their basic needs. Wyatt on his wife Betsy, and Christina on her brother. Look at how Andy is looking at her. He just absolutely adored her. There was a strange connection between us, Wyatt said. One of those odd collisions. We were a little alike. I was an unhealthy child who was kept at home. So there was an unsaid feeling between us that was wonderful, an utter naturalness. We'd sit for hours and not say a word, and then she'd say something and I'd answer. A reporter once asked her what we talked about, and she said, "Nothing foolish." I love that. That's my epigraph. So all of this led, we're getting to the end here, all of this led to his masterpiece, Christina's World. So one day he barged into the house as he was wont to do, and he saw Christina in the pink dress that had been sewn for her to wear to her favorite nephew, John's wedding. He also had seen Christina pulling herself down the grass to visit her parents' graves in the family graveyard, and he got this idea. My memory can be more of a reality than the thing itself, he said. I kept thinking about the day I would paint Christina in her pink dress like a faded lobster shell I might find on a beach. I kept building her in my mind, a living being there on a hill whose grass was really growing. Someday I knew she was going to be buried under it. And of course, she was. Here's her grave with her brother Alvaro. So Alvaro died fairly quickly of cancer in December of 1967, and Christina died less than a month later. They said of a broken heart, that there was no physical reason that she needed to die, but she did. And here's something interesting. The Wyeth family, of course, had their own graveyard in Pennsylvania, Chatsford, but Andrew Wyeth requested to be buried with the Olson family. And here, in fact, is his gravestone. And if you look at the angle of his grave, it's right around where Christina would have been lying. Soon, Wyeth said, her figure was actually going to crawl across the hill in my picture toward that dry tinderbox of the house on top. I felt the loneliness of that figure, perhaps the same that I felt myself as a kid. It was as much my experience as hers. This is a picture of someone. When I put it on paper, my cold eye took in her deformity, shook me. I'd been so interested in her being, I hadn't thought about deformity. She was so much bigger to me than her idiosyncrasies. I thought of Christina existing in that miniature house, not just Christina in small size, but a real one with an independent life of her own. I was building a real house, the clapboards and everything, each little sill on every small window. I worked on that hill for a couple of months, that grass, building up the ground to make it come towards you, a surge of earth, like the whole planet. This is my English cover. When it came time to put Christina's figure against the planet I created for her all those weeks, I put that pink tone on her shoulder, and it almost blew me across the room. So in becoming an artist's muse, a seemingly passive role, I believe that Christina finally achieved the autonomy and purpose that she had craved her entire life. Instinctively, I think Wyeth managed to get at the core of herself. In the painting, she is paradoxically singular and representative, exposed and enigmatic, hardy and vulnerable. She is solitary, but surrounded by the ghosts of her past. Like the house, like the landscape, she perseveres. And as an embodiment of the strength of the human character, I believe she is vibrant, pulsating, and ultimately immortal. So I'd like to read you just one page, the prologue. And I know you've read the book, many of you, but I think having heard all that about the story, you'll hear the prologue a little bit differently. But I don't have the book. Does anyone have one? All right. So we're almost done here. Later, he told me he'd been afraid to show me the painting, which, by the way, is true. He was afraid to show her the painting. He thought I wouldn't like the way he portrayed me, dragging myself across the field, fingers clutching dirt, my legs twisted behind. The arid moonscape of wheatgrass and timothy, that dilapidated house in the distance, looming up like a secret that won't stay hidden. Faraway windows, opaque and unreadable, ruts in the spiky grass, leading nowhere. Dishwater sky. People think the painting is a portrait, but it isn't. Not really. He wasn't even in the field. He conjured it from a room in the house, an entirely different angle. He removed rocks and trees and outbuildings. The scale of the barn is all wrong, and I am not that frail young thing. but a middle-aged spinster. It's not my body, really, and maybe not even my head. He did get one thing right. Sometimes a sanctuary, sometimes a prison, that house on the hill has always been my home. I've spent my life yearning toward it, wanting to escape it, paralyzed by its hold on me. There are many ways to be crippled, I've learned over the years, many forms of paralysis. My ancestors fled to Maine from Salem, but like anyone who tries to run away from the past, they brought it with them. Something inexorable seeds itself in the place of your origin. You can never escape the bonds of family history, no matter how far you travel. And the skeleton of a house can carry in its bones the marrow of all that came before. Who are you, Christina Olson? He asked me once. Well, nobody had ever asked me that. I had to think about it for a while. If you really want to know me, I said, we'll have to start with the witches. And then the drowned boys. The shells from distant lands, a whole room full of them. The Swedish sailor marooned in ice. I'll need to tell you about the false smiles of the Harvard man and the hand-wringing of those brilliant Boston doctors. The dory in the haymow, the wheelchair in the sea. And eventually, though neither of us knew it, we'd end up here, in this place, within and without the world of the painting. So, thank you. To answer questions. And I'm happy if you have questions about it. I don't mind that either. By the way, someone just sent me this picture that they took. I know, isn't that sweet? So I added. Okay, I know you have questions, so let's get started. You ask the question and I'll repeat it. Yes.
I'm curious as why.
Oh, every country has a different cover. You should see the Italian cover. What's that? Did I have a choice about whether to keep the same cover? I don't. So the Italian, I'll show you on my phone. I can show you on my phone. It's cool because I like both covers. They're choosing between two. They asked me which one I liked better. For foreign editions, I usually don't get final day. I do get final day for ours, American.